Imagine sitting in a locked psychiatric ward during the height of a global pandemic, completely isolated from the outside world for your own safety, only to hear the nurses outside your door frantically whispering that two people have breached the front desk, screaming your name and demanding to be let in. Who would risk arrest, violate strict lockdown protocols, and aggressively hunt down a vulnerable person hiding in a secure medical facility? The answer still sends a freezing, nauseating chill down my spine every single time I think about it. It wasn't a deranged stalker. It wasn't a violent ex-partner. It was my parents. And as I sit here right now, barely breathing, counting down the days to a funeral I absolutely have to attend, I am completely paralyzed by the terrifying reality that they might be waiting for me there, lurking right next to the casket. I could honestly write thick, heavy volumes about my parents. I could fill entire encyclopedias with the psychological warfare, the subtle cruelties, and the suffocating control they exerted over my life for decades. But to keep things focused, I will just say this. Going completely no contact with them was without a shadow of a doubt the greatest, most life-saving decision I have ever made. It just took me way too long to actually do it. For years, I endured their behavior because society constantly beats this narrative into our heads that family is everything and you only get one mother and father. You get so deeply conditioned to absorb their toxicity that you don't even realize you're drowning in it until the water is completely over your head. I made excuses for them. I absorbed the pain. I let them chip away at my sanity piece by piece because I thought that was simply the rent I had to pay to exist in their world. But everything shifted the moment I became a mother. There is a profound, almost primal rewiring that happens in your brain when you look down at a child who depends entirely on you for their physical and emotional safety. You suddenly realize that your primary job on this earth is to be their shield. For the first few years of my child's life, I tried to manage the relationship with my parents. I tried to keep them at arm's length, carefully curating their interactions, hoping against hope that they could just be normal, loving grandparents. I desperately wanted my kid to have the idyllic, picture-perfect bond with them. But toxic people don't magically become healthy when a new generation is born. They just find fresh, vulnerable targets. The absolute breaking point, the moment the final thread snapped, happened when my child was just 4 years old. 4. That is an age of pure, unfiltered innocence. An age where a child's mind is a sponge, absorbing every word, every tone, every subtle manipulation. The exact second I caught my parents trying to employ their twisted, manipulative behavior on my tiny, defenseless 4-year-old, a fire ignited inside me that I had never felt before. You can mess with me. You can tear me down, gaslight me, and make me feel like I am entirely crazy. But the moment you turn those stark, calculating eyes toward my kid, that is where the line is drawn in thick, impenetrable concrete. I cut them off. I walked away, slammed the door, and locked it behind me. I chose to protect my child, and in doing so, I finally chose to protect myself. I thought that would be the end of it. I naively believed that if I drew a hard line, communicated my boundaries, and simply walked away, they would eventually realize they had lost and leave me alone to heal. I was so incredibly wrong. To people like my parents, a boundary is not a stop sign. It is a challenge. it is an open invitation to escalate. They never, for one single second, accepted my decision. The immediate aftermath of going no contact was supposed to be peaceful, but instead, it turned into an agonizing state of hypervigilance. My own home stopped feeling like a sanctuary and started feeling like a fortress under siege. It began with the mail. You never really think about the mail until opening a little metal box at the end of your driveway becomes a trigger for a full-blown panic attack. At first, it was letters. Thick, heavy envelopes with my name written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. The moment I would see that handwriting, the physical reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. My chest would tighten so severely, it felt like a heavy iron plate was crushing my lungs. My vision would blur, my hands would start trembling uncontrollably, and a cold, prickly sweat would break out across my neck. Just the sight of their handwriting carried the weight of 1,000 psychological blows. I couldn't even touch the envelopes. If I accidentally brushed my fingers against the paper, I felt contaminated. It got so bad that my best friend, my absolute rock in this chaotic world, had to step in. She became my official mail screener. She would come over, walk to the mailbox, sort through the bills and the junk mail, and quietly extract the poison my parents kept trying to inject into my life. She would take their letters away, so I never had to see them. For a short time, that system worked. I could breathe a little easier, knowing I had a buffer between me and their relentless pursuit. But my parents are nothing if not cunning. When they realized their letters weren't getting a response, they didn't stop, they adapted. They realized that letters came in envelopes, and envelopes could be thrown away unopened. So, they switched to postcards. It sounds so trivial, doesn't it? A postcard, usually reserved for cheerful vacation greetings. But in the hands of my parents, a postcard was a precision-guided missile. A postcard has no protective envelope. The words are exposed, naked, and impossible to ignore. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that when my best friend wasn't there and I had to check the mail myself, the mere act of pulling a postcard out of the box would force me to see their words. My eyes would involuntarily catch a sentence, a phrase, a manipulative hook designed to pull me right back into the dark place I had fought so desperately to crawl out of. Even catching a glimpse of the content was enough to ruin my entire week, sending me spiraling back into a dark, suffocating state of anxiety. I was fighting a war on two fronts: the relentless external stalking from my parents and the internal battle with my own deeply scarred mental health. I have been in constant intensive therapy for over 7 years. I was diagnosed as autistic just 2.5 years ago, a revelation that finally explained why the sensory and emotional overload of my parents' abuse left me so utterly paralyzed and exhausted. I have spent my entire adult life trying to untangle the massive knots of trauma they tied in my brain. And yet, no matter how much work I do, no matter how many therapists I see, or how many coping mechanisms I learn, the looming shadow of my parents still has so much terrible, unyielding power over me. The lengths my parents were willing to go to in order to bypass my boundaries and assert their dominance over my life were nothing short of terrifying. But if I thought the postcards were bad, I was entirely unprepared for how far they would escalate when an opportunity presented itself. An opportunity like my child's first day of school. In my country, a child's very first day of school isn't just a quick drop-off with a packed lunch. It is a massive, celebrated milestone. It's an enormous cultural event marked by gatherings, gifts, and the coming together of extended family. By the time this milestone arrived for my child, their father and I were already separated. Our relationship at the time was intensely strained, fractured by our own unresolved issues, and communicating with him was like walking across a minefield blindfolded. Because things between us were so bad, we weren't operating as a unified front. We were barely operating as co-parents. To celebrate our child's big day, my ex decided to host a get-together at his place. And in a move that I still struggle to wrap my head around, he took it upon himself to invite my parents. When I found out, the ground completely fell out from beneath me. The panic was instantaneous and utterly consuming. I felt cornered, trapped in an impossible situation. I had spent so much energy meticulously building walls to keep my parents out, and my ex had just strolled over and unlocked the front gate. Now, to be fair to him, he has profusely apologized since then. A year after this incident, he finally experienced their true venomous colors firsthand, and he realized the catastrophic mistake he had made. I genuinely believe that at the time, his thought process wasn't malicious toward me. He just had this naive, idealistic notion that our child should keep in touch with their grandparents. He didn't think to care about my firm, desperate decision to stay no contact, simply because he didn't fully comprehend the depth of the danger they posed. But his lack of understanding didn't change my terrifying reality. I was suddenly faced with an agonizing dilemma. On one hand, the sheer thought of being in the same physical space as my parents made me want to curl up into a ball and disappear. I knew exactly how it would play out. I knew it would be agonizingly difficult being subjected to their presence. I knew with absolute certainty that my mother would not miss the opportunity to corner me. She would use the chaotic, celebratory environment as a smokescreen to launch an ambush, forcing me into an interaction I desperately wanted to avoid. But, on the other hand, how could I possibly miss my own child's first day of school celebration? How could I look at my kid's bright, excited face and explain why mommy wasn't there? I couldn't let my kid down. I couldn't let my parents steal this moment from us. So I made the excruciating choice to go. But I refused to go unprotected. I brought reinforcements. My friend, who is the godfather to my kid, happened to have a place right near there anyway. I begged him to stick by my side, to act as a physical and emotional shield between me and the people who gave me life. But even having him there wasn't enough to quell the terror vibrating through my bones. In the days leading up to the event, I sat in my therapist's office, weeping, shaking, and role-playing the inevitable confrontation. We meticulously crafted a single, firm sentence, a verbal shield. I practiced it over and over until it became muscle memory, repeating it in the mirror, in a shower, in my car. I needed to know exactly what to say when they approached me, so I wouldn't freeze, crumble, or get sucked back into their vortex. And of course, just as I predicted, I needed to use it. The party was bustling. Kids were laughing, adults were chatting, and I was trying my hardest to just focus on my child, keeping my eyes darting nervously around the room, tracking my parents' movements like a prey animal watching a predator. I thought I had a handle on the situation. I thought I had managed to keep a safe distance. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. I felt a sudden heavy presence right beside me. Before I could even turn my head, my mother was standing so close I could feel the heat radiating off her. Without a word of warning, she reached out. She slapped her hands firmly onto my arm and my shoulder, her fingers gripping me tightly, physically pinning me in place. The physical contact sent a violent shockwave of revulsion straight through my nervous system. It took everything in my power not to physically recoil or scream. She leaned in, her eyes locking onto mine with that intense, controlling glare I had feared my entire life. She completely ignored the years of silence, the boundaries, the fact that we were practically strangers now. Instead, she plastered on this bizarre, artificial smile and asked, her voice dripping with an entitled, sickly sweet tone, "Do you have time for us later? Just for 2 hours." Time for them later. For 2 hours. To this day, I still cannot get over that incredibly specific, chilling time frame. 2 hours. It wasn't, "Can we talk?" or "We miss you." It was a scheduled demand. It was a calculated measurement of my time that she felt entitled to claim. 2 hours of undivided attention for them to gaslight me, guilt trip me, and attempt to drag me back under their thumb. In that split second, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My throat closed up. The little girl inside me screamed to just nod, to obey, to do whatever it took to appease her so she would let go of my arm. But I'm not that little girl anymore. I took a sharp breath, digging my nails into my own palms to anchor myself to reality. I looked right past her, tapped into that well of courage I had built in my therapist's office, and recited my practiced sentence. I spoke the words flatly, with absolutely no emotion, giving her absolutely nothing to feed on. I don't even remember the exact phrasing anymore, only the profound, empowering weight of delivering it. The moment the last word left my lips, I forcibly peeled my arm away from her grip, physically turned my back to her, and immediately walked straight toward my friend, the Godfather. I didn't look back. I didn't wait to see her reaction. I just kept walking until I was standing next to someone who actually loved me, my whole body shaking like a leaf in the hurricane. I survived that day. I protected my child, I held my ground, and I made it out. But that interaction proved what I already knew deep in my gut. They were never going to stop. They were never going to respect my boundaries. They were simply waiting for the next crack in the armor, the next moment of vulnerability, to force their way back in. And unfortunately, my most vulnerable moment was yet to come. It arrived when my mental health completely collapsed, landing me in a psychiatric hospital for several months. When you check yourself into a psychiatric hospital, you do so because you have hit rock bottom. It is not a vacation. It is not a casual retreat. It is a desperate, profound admission that your mind has become an unsafe place for you to live, and you need professional help to build the walls back up before everything completely collapses. You go there for a very specific kind of safety. Safety from the world, safety from your own darkest thoughts, and safety from the people who caused those thoughts to fester in the first place. My longest stay was 7 agonizing months. During one of my more severe episodes, I found myself in the hospital for a couple of months. Now, keep in mind the timeline here. This was during the peak of the COVID-19 lockdown. The world outside was practically shut down. Hospitals, especially vulnerable wards like psychiatric units, were operating under the strictest, most impenetrable security protocols imaginable. You couldn't just casually stroll in to see a patient. Absolutely no one was allowed inside the building, no exceptions. Any permitted visitation was a massive logistical nightmare. Visitors had to be meticulously pre-approved by the medical staff, tested for the virus, and even then, you could only meet them completely outdoors, socially distanced, wearing masks for an absolute maximum of 1 single hour. This environment was meant to be my sanctuary. It was supposed to be the one place on earth where my parents could not reach me. But I had underestimated the destructive power of a toxic family network. While I was tucked away, trying to tape the shattered pieces of my mind back together, my ex-in-laws made a fatal error. They were still in contact with my parents at the time. They were in town visiting my child, and during some casual conversation, they inexplicably let it slip to my parents that I was currently admitted to the local psychiatric hospital. My memory of this entire period is extremely blurry. Trauma and heavy medication tend to do that. But the facts of what happened next are burned into my brain forever. The moment my parents found out where I was, they didn't feel concern. They didn't feel a sudden pang of parental worry for their deeply struggling daughter. They saw an opportunity. They saw me trapped in a cage, unable to run, unable to hide, and unable to enforce my boundaries. Instead of respecting my space, instead of giving me the grace to heal, they mobilized. They drove to the hospital. I remember the day my therapist walked into my room. Her face was tight, her posture rigid, carrying a tension that immediately spiked my anxiety. She sat down across from me, her voice carefully measured, and told me what had just transpired downstairs at the reception desk. My parents had stormed into the lobby of a locked-down medical facility during a global pandemic. They didn't ask about the visitation rules. They didn't politely inquire if I was accepting visitors. They marched right up to the front desk and loudly, aggressively demanded to see me. They threw a massive, entitled fit in the middle of a hospital lobby, treating the terrified receptionists like obstacles in their path to claiming what they believed was theirs. Me. My therapist, who is a seasoned professional used to dealing with all sorts of chaotic family dynamics, was visibly disturbed by their behavior. She told me they were raising their voices, completely ignoring the strict COVID protocols, entirely indifferent to the fact that their actions were violating the safety and privacy of not just me, but every single vulnerable patient in that building. It took the staff forcefully explaining the absolute legal and medical impossibility of their demands to finally get them to leave. Sitting on my narrow hospital bed, listening to my therapist recount the scene, I felt physically ill. My stomach violently churned and a cold sweat drenched my skin. The sheer audacity of it, the breathtaking entitlement. Even when I was locked behind secure doors, stripped of all my coping mechanisms, battling for my own will to live, they still tried to kick the door down and drag me back into their twisted reality. They couldn't stand the idea of me being somewhere they couldn't control. The fact that they were perfectly willing to disrupt my healing process, to violate federal health mandates, just to force themselves into my line of sight, it was the ultimate proof that my parents didn't love me. They only wanted to possess me. That incident in the hospital solidified my resolve, but it also cemented a deep, agonizing terror inside me. If locked hospital doors during a pandemic couldn't deter them, what could? The answer, sadly, was nothing. Because when they finally realized they couldn't break me directly, they decided to change their tactics. They decided to hit me where it hurt the most. They decided to bypass me entirely and go straight for the most precious, vulnerable part of my world. They went for my child. It happened after my kid's father finally had his own massive awakening. After witnessing their relentless boundary stomping and manipulation, he too realized the severe danger they posed. He decided that he wanted absolutely nothing to do with them anymore. And more importantly, he joined me in wanting to completely shield our kid from their influence. My ex-in-laws, however, were still desperately clinging to this fabricated idea of a big, happy, extended family. They still had a pretty strong relationship with my kid at that time, and my ex and I trusted them enough to allow visits. We had no idea that we were essentially sending our child into a trap. My parents, furious that both my ex and I had cut them off, slithered their way to my ex-in-laws. They used them as willing accomplices in a deeply disturbing, covert operation. Whenever my kid was visiting their paternal grandparents, the manipulation would begin. My ex-in-laws would suddenly pull out packages that my parents had sent, gifts, letters, toys, and give them to my child. They would encourage my kid to sit down and draw pictures specifically for my parents. They would even schedule secret, supervised phone calls between my child and the people I had explicitly banned from our lives. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part? The part that makes my blood boil with a white-hot rage just thinking about it is what they told my child to do afterward. They looked my sweet, innocent kid in the eyes and told them, "Don't tell mom and dad. This is our little secret." It wasn't a quick, fleeting incident either. It wasn't a one-time slip in judgment or a moment of weakness. This went on for an entire year. A full year. 365 days of my child silently carrying the colossal, suffocating burden of a secret they were explicitly told to keep from their own parents. Imagine just for a second the sheer psychological weight that places on a small child. Children are naturally terrible at keeping secrets, especially from the people they depend on for everything. Their instinct is to share, to babble, to seek comfort in the arms of their primary caregivers. To force a child to internalize a secret of that magnitude, knowing it involves the two most important people in their world, is a form of emotional abuse. It fractures their trust. It creates an agonizing internal conflict. Do I betray my grandparents, who are giving me gifts and telling me this is a fun game? Or do I betray my parents, who are my entire safe harbor? When my child finally broke down and confessed to me after a year of holding it all in, my heart physically ached. It felt like a cold, jagged knife had been slowly dragged across my chest. The look of guilt and confusion on my kid's face was utterly devastating. They had been manipulated into believing they were doing something wrong by simply wanting to tell me the truth. They had been trained to view me, their mother, their protector, as the enemy in this twisted scenario. The betrayal I felt from my ex-in-laws was immense, absolute, and immediate. The sheer audacity of them bypassing my explicit, hard-fought boundaries to facilitate secret communication with my abusers was unforgivable. And my ex-husband? He was absolutely livid. His reaction was a visceral mix of rage and profound disappointment. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was ours, and the line had been crossed in the most egregious way possible. We didn't hesitate. We didn't debate the nuance of the situation. Me, Kiddo, and my ex immediately went completely silent on my ex-in-laws. We cut them off. For months, they were met with an absolute, impenetrable wall of silence. No calls, no visits, no updates, no access to their grandchild. They had proven themselves entirely untrustworthy, prioritizing their own warped sense of family unity over the psychological safety of a child. The silence stretched on, a heavy, punitive weight, until they finally cracked. They caved under the pressure of losing their grandchild and came to us, desperate, apologizing and promising, swearing that they would never again let my parents use them as a conduit to my kid. They had learned a very hard, very necessary lesson about boundaries the hard way. But the damage was already done. The trust was completely obliterated. To this day, my ex-husband still doesn't talk to his parents. I cannot blame him in the slightest. The betrayal ran too deep. As for my kid, they are technically allowed to see my ex-in-laws if they choose to, but the desire just isn't there much anymore. Kids are incredibly perceptive. They might not understand the complex nuances of adult toxicity, but they understand when an environment feels unsafe, manipulative, or emotionally fraught. The relationship withered because my ex-in-laws poisoned the well. And my parents? How did they react to losing their secret pipeline to my child? They didn't retreat. They didn't reflect on their actions. They escalated. With their access to my kid firmly severed, their attention snapped violently back to me. The mail started arriving with alarming frequency again. Letters, packages, and relentless attempts to force themselves back into my immediate physical space. It culminated this past Christmas. I was already highly anxious, dreading the inevitable holiday hoovering attempts, when a notification arrived. A package was waiting for me at the post office. The physical reaction was instantaneous. The familiar tightening in my chest, the cold sweat, the uncontrollable shaking. I knew exactly who it was from. The mere thought of having to go down to the post office, stand in line, and physically handle a box packed full of their guilt and manipulation made me want to vomit. But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't just let it sit there. I mustered every ounce of strength I had, drove to the post office, and stood before the clerk. When they handed me the slip, I didn't even look at the box. I just stated clearly and firmly, I decline this package. Return to sender. Walking out of the post office, I felt a fleeting rush of triumph, a momentary high of asserting my autonomy. But it evaporated almost immediately, replaced by a deep, cloying dread. Declining a package from my parents is never a simple act. It is a declaration of war in their eyes. The moment that box was shipped back to them, I knew they would perceive it as a monumental insult. I knew they would be furious. For the next several weeks, I lived in a state of sheer, unadulterated terror. I was constantly checking my windows, jumping at every unexpected knock, every strange car that drove down my street. I thought they might retaliate by simply showing up at my door. I imagined them marching up my driveway, demanding an explanation, screaming on my front porch for all my neighbors to hear. The psychological toll of that waiting game was agonizing. I was so incredibly relieved when they didn't show up. But the threat, the ever-present looming possibility that they could, never truly dissipated. It just settled back into the shadows, waiting for the next opportunity. Respecting boundaries has never ever been a strong suit of my parents. They view boundaries as a personal attack, a challenge to their authority. And that, unfortunately, brings me to the massive, terrifying problem I am facing right now. Sorry for the incredibly long introduction, but you had to understand the sheer magnitude of the relentless pursuit to understand why I am currently spiraling into a full-blown panic. Next week is the funeral of my friend's sister. This isn't just any friend. This is the friend who stood next to me at my child's first day of school, acting as my human shield against my mother. This is the friend who is the godfather to my kid. This friend and his entire family have been an integral, irreplaceable part of my life since kindergarten. They are not just friends, they are my family of choice. I cannot overstate how deeply intertwined my friend's family is with my very survival. When you grow up in a house where love is conditional, manipulative, and laced with psychological landmines, you instinctively search for a safe harbor elsewhere. For me, that harbor was their house. When we were in school, I practically lived there. Every single morning, before the bell even rang, I would be at their home. I would walk into their kitchen, and the sheer contrast between the tense, suffocating atmosphere of my own house and the warm, chaotic, genuine love radiating from theirs was staggering. I would just sit together with them for breakfast. I wouldn't even eat anything. I had already forced down whatever was offered at home just to avoid a fight. But I wasn't there for the food. I was there for the emotional warmth. I was there to feel what it was like to be in a room where adults actually liked each other, where siblings bickered but loved fiercely, and where a child's presence wasn't treated as a burden or a tool for manipulation. In hindsight, as an adult who has spent thousands of hours analyzing my trauma in therapy, I finally realized how critically important those 10 to 20 minutes were each day. That brief window of normalcy, that fleeting glimpse of unconditional acceptance, was literally keeping my spirit alive. His mom didn't just tolerate me being there, she embraced me. She called me her third kid. That simple phrase, uttered with such casual, effortless affection, meant more to me than my own parents could ever comprehend. They were there for me through every major milestone. They were at my wedding, cheering the loudest. When my marriage imploded and my mental health absolutely tanked to the point where I couldn't even hold down a job, they didn't turn their backs on me. They didn't judge me. They supported me financially during my divorce, ensuring I had a roof over my head and food for my child while I was completely shattered and unable to function. I'm so profoundly, overwhelmingly grateful I have them in my life. They are my chosen family. They are the people who showed me what love actually looks like. And now they are experiencing unimaginable grief. My friend's sister is gone. Not going to her funeral is absolutely not an option. It's not even a question in my mind. I have to be there. I need to stand by my friend, to hold his mother's hand, and to honor the life of a woman who was a constant bright light in my darkest years. I need to physically show up for the people who always showed up for me. But I am terrified. I am completely, utterly paralyzed by the terrifying thought that somehow, in some twisted, convoluted way, my parents know about this funeral. Logically, I know the chances are incredibly slim. My rational brain is screaming at me to look at the facts. My parents don't talk to my friend's family. They haven't lived in our hometown for over 20 years. They are completely disconnected from that part of my life. Furthermore, attending this funeral would require them to make a grueling 6-hour car ride each way. It makes absolutely zero logical sense for them to show up. But trauma doesn't care about logic. Trauma only remembers the history of their relentless, boundary-stomping behavior. My parents possess an uncanny, almost supernatural ability to sniff out vulnerability. They seem to operate on this sickening radar that alerts them whenever I am exposed, grieving, or emotionally compromised. If they somehow found out about this funeral through some distant relative, a local obituary, or some forgotten connection, they would immediately, correctly assume that I would be there. And they would view this solemn, deeply personal moment of grief not as a tragedy to be respected, but as a prime, unmissable opportunity to ambush me. They would use the vulnerability of the situation, the social pressure of a funeral, and the sheer shock of their presence to force themselves on me. They know I wouldn't want to cause a scene at my friend's sister's funeral. They know I would be trapped by the solemnity of the event, unable to scream or run away without disrespecting the grieving family. It is the perfect, terrifyingly calculated setup for them to corner me, to grab my arm, to whisper their manipulative poison in my ear, while I am already breaking down in tears. Even though the logical probability is low, the physical reaction of my body is entirely real. I am panicking. My heart races every time I think about walking into that church. My palms sweat at the thought of scanning the pews, not to find my friends, but to frantically search for the familiar, chilling silhouettes of my mother and father. The anticipatory anxiety is eating me alive, consuming every ounce of energy I have left. I am spending my days agonizing over escape routes, practicing emergency statements with my therapist, and mentally preparing myself for a confrontation that might not even happen. I know that I have to work on myself. I am acutely aware of the fact that I am only freaking out this intensely because I still, after all these years of no contact, let my parents have so much power over my mind. I understand intellectually that it is a choice. It is a choice to ignore them, to banish their phantom presence from my thoughts, just as it was a deeply difficult but necessary choice to go no contact in the physical world. I know I need to evict them from the rent-free space they occupy in my head, but I haven't found a way to actually do that. I have spent 7 years in constant, unrelenting therapy. 7 years of dissecting every childhood memory, every whispered insult, every instance of gaslighting that shaped the architecture of my brain. I have endured stays in psychiatric hospitals, the longest clocking in at 7 grueling months, where I was poked, prodded, and medicated in a desperate attempt to find a version of myself that didn't tremble at the sound of a phone ringing. And then, 2.5 years ago, I received my autism diagnosis. It was like finally being handed the instruction manual for my own nervous system. It explained so much. Why my sensory system goes into overdrive when I'm cornered. Why the emotional volatility of my parents felt like physical blows to my body. And why my brain struggles to let go in the way that neurotypical people seem to do so effortlessly. I have learned to advocate for myself. I have built a support system of friends who are essentially family, and I have achieved the impossible by cutting my abusers out of my daily life. Yet, despite all of that work, here I am, paralyzed. I'm sitting in my living room, the house silent, and I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. My brain is a traitor. It's constantly scanning the horizon, looking for threats that aren't there. I find myself checking the mailbox with the same level of caution one might use when approaching a ticking bomb. I jump when the car pulls into the driveway, my heart leaping into my throat until I realize it's just the delivery driver or a neighbor coming home. How the hell do I evict them? How do I truly reclaim the headspace they've been occupying for 30 years? It's one thing to say, don't let them have power over you. It's another thing entirely when your body's nervous system is hardwired to associate their presence with a threat to your existence. Every time I think about next week, about standing by my friend's side at his sister's funeral, I don't just feel nervous. I feel an ancient, primal sense of dread. I feel the phantom sensation of my mother's hand on my arm, the chillingly specific request for 2 hours of my time, the sound of their voices demanding access to a locked hospital ward. My body is stuck in a loop of fight or flight, and my mind doesn't know how to turn the signal off. I've tried everything. I've tried grounding techniques. I've tried writing them letters I never send. I've tried visual metaphors of closing doors and locking gates. But the ghosts of my parents are persistent. They are masters of intrusion. What if I'm wrong? What if they do show up? The scenario plays out in my head like a horror movie. They arrive, impeccably dressed, acting the part of the devastated, estranged grandparents. They approach me with fake tears, their faces masks of performative grief. The entire congregation would see a daughter rejecting her own parents at a funeral. They would frame the narrative to make me look like the villain, the cold-hearted, ungrateful child who wouldn't even acknowledge her own mother in the face of death. That is the kind of social manipulation they excel at. They don't just want to control me, they want to control how the world sees me. And that's the real fear, isn't it? It's not just the fear of being cornered, it's the fear of being exposed, of being misunderstood, of having my hard-won sanctuary tarnished by their presence. It's the fear that even in a place of mourning, I won't be allowed to have my own feelings, my own boundaries, or my own peace. I'm at a crossroads, and I feel like I'm standing on a precipice. I have to go to this funeral. I owe it to my friend, and I owe it to the memory of his sister. But I also have to survive the experience without letting my parents destroy my recovery. I find myself wondering, is this what freedom looks like? Is this the price of admission for finally being yourself? A life where you're always looking over your shoulder, waiting for the shadows to move? If you've ever had to cut a toxic person out of your life, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know that the moment you leave, the real work begins. Not just the work of building a new life, but the internal war to stop waiting for their reappearance. You spend so much time preparing for the what ifs that you forget to actually live in the now. I'm telling you all of this because I know I'm not alone. Somewhere out there, someone is reading this, and they know the exact weight of that phantom hand on their arm. They know the feeling of scanning a room for an enemy who might not even be there. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? If you were standing at that funeral, knowing that the people who caused your trauma might just walk through the door, how would you keep your composure? How do you protect your peace when the threat is mostly living in your own head? I really want to hear what you think. Drop a comment below. I read all of them. Maybe your experience or your advice could be the thing that finally helps me take that next step. And if you've ever had to navigate the incredibly lonely, terrifying, but necessary path of going no contact, please know that you aren't alone. We're all fighting these battles together, one day at a time. If you want to hear more about how I navigate this, or if you just want to support this community of people trying to heal from family trauma, hit that subscribe button. It helps get these stories out to people who really need to know that their boundaries are valid and that they aren't crazy for wanting to be safe. I'm going to go to that funeral. I'm going to wear my armor. I'm going to stay close to my support system, and I'm going to be there for my friend. And if they show up, I'm going to use the one weapon they can't handle: complete, absolute, and utterly indifferent silence. Because that is the one thing they can never take away from me. My silence is my power. My silence is my boundaries. My silence is my life. I keep telling myself that silence is my ultimate superpower. But there is a jagged piece of me that feels like it's just waiting to be shattered. It's that part of me that remembers being small, being manipulated, and being told that I was the one who was wrong. Even after all the therapy, after the hospital stays, after the diagnosis that finally gave my brain its own vocabulary, the fear that I am, at my core, damaged goods still lingers. When you live with this level of trauma, you aren't just living a life, you're performing a constant, exhausting, high-stakes reconnaissance mission. I walk into a grocery store and I scan the aisles for their faces. I check my rearview mirror at every stoplight, my heart jumping when a car with a similar model to theirs pulls up behind me. It is a state of hyper-arousal that never truly dissipates. It's like having a smoke detector that goes off every time you strike a match, even when you're just trying to light a candle in your own home. And now, the funeral. This isn't just about a church, a casket, and a grieving family. It's about the sheer violation of space. My parents have never respected the sanctity of a moment. They see my life as a theater production where they are the directors and I am the unwilling lead actor. If they show up, they won't just be attending, they will be performing. They'll play the role of the long-suffering, misunderstood parents of an autistic, mentally unstable daughter. They know that in a setting like a funeral, people are at their most vulnerable and most polite. They would bank on the fact that I wouldn't dare cause a scene. They would bank on the fact that I'd be too frozen, too polite, too traumatized to tell them to get the hell out. But what if I do something different this time? My therapist keeps telling me that the power they hold over me is only as strong as the fear I feed it. She says, the monster only exists as long as you believe it can get to you. But how do you stop believing in a monster that has physically broken into your life again and again? How do you convince your nervous system that you are safe when your brain has a file cabinet full of evidence that you are not? I've started thinking about that 2 hours demand. Every time I remember it, I feel that same cold, creeping dread. It was so specific, wasn't it? It was a transaction. They didn't want a conversation, they wanted a hostage situation. They wanted to sit me down, look me in the eyes, and systematically disassemble the person I had fought so hard to become. They wanted to use those 2 hours to remind me of every failure, every shortcoming, and every reason why I should still be under their control. But I survived that day. I walked away. And I've survived everything since. I'm starting to realize that the panic I feel isn't just about them. It's about my own fear of finally letting go of the anger. Because as long as I'm angry at them, as long as I'm afraid of them, they're still in my life. They're still taking up space. They're still a part of my daily internal narrative. When I finally stop being afraid, when I finally reach a place where I truly, deeply don't care if they show up, or what they say, or how they look at me, That's when they'll truly be dead to me. But I'm not there yet, and that scares me more than anything. I'm going to that funeral. I have my best friend, the godfather to my kid, waiting for me there. He knows, he's seen them, he's seen me at my worst, and I know with 100% certainty that if my parents walk through those doors, he will be the first one to stand in their way. He will be the wall. I have a support system that I didn't have when I was younger, and I need to start trusting that. I need to start leaning into the people who love me rather than just bracing for the impact of the people who hurt me. But I want to know, have you ever had to walk into a room, a public space, or a family event knowing that your abuser might be there? How did you prepare yourself? Did you have a code word with a friend? Did you have an escape plan? Sometimes, just knowing that other people have survived these moments helps me breathe a little easier. I think the biggest lie we are told is that we have to be healed before we can live a normal life. That we have to be perfectly zen, perfectly calm, and perfectly detached. But that's not true. We can be terrified, we can be shaking, and we can still walk through the door. We can be a mess and still be brave. I'm going to be a mess at this funeral. I'm going to be grieving my friend's sister, and I'm going to be fighting for my life against the anxiety of my parents showing up. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the reality of surviving trauma. You don't get to leave the trauma at the door. You carry it with you, but you keep moving forward anyway. If you are currently struggling with a toxic family member who refuses to accept your boundaries, please do not lose hope. You are not the problem. The fact that you are fighting for your peace is a testament to your strength, not your weakness. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. And you are allowed to protect the life you've built, no matter how much they try to tear it down. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to go to that funeral. I'm going to look my friend in the eye and be there for him. And if the worst happens and they appear, I will look right through them. They will be nothing more than strangers to me. No more power, no more fear, just silence. The realization that I am finally reaching that point, the point where they become strangers, is terrifying in its own right. It feels like losing a shadow. Even a shadow that's trying to trip you, it's still being a part of your life for every single step of the way. If I let go of the fear, what fills that void? What happens when I finally stop scanning the room for them, and for the first time in my life, I just breathe? I'm afraid that if I stop being vigilant, I'll be caught off guard. But the truth is, I've been living in a permanent state of caught off guard for years, even when I'm alone in my own locked bedroom. This upcoming funeral is the test. It's the final exam in the curriculum I never wanted to study. But I have to show up, not just for my friend's sister, not just for his family, but for the version of me that spent 20 years thinking I had no choice but to stay in that house. I am going to walk into that church, and I am going to hold my friend's hand, and I am going to let the emotions of the day wash over me. I'm going to grieve, and I'm going to cry, and I'm going to be completely, unreservedly human. And if they appear, if by some miracle of their twisted, obsessed, stalker-like dedication, they actually show up, I have a plan. It's not just a plan for them, it's a plan for me. My friend, the one who stood by me at the school gate, has agreed to be my anchor. We've established a signal. If I feel that familiar tightening in my chest, if I see the unmistakable silhouette of my parents near the back of the chapel. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to speak. I don't have to run. He will see me. He will recognize the shift in my posture and he will step in. He will treat them exactly like what they are, intruders. He will handle the logistics of getting them away from me. He will be the wall. It feels so empowering to finally realize I don't have to be the one to do the fighting alone anymore. I spent so long trying to be the strong one, the one who took the hits, the one who protected everyone else. But I'm allowed to let someone else protect me. I'm allowed to be supported. That's the lesson I'm trying to internalize before next week. I know some of you might be wondering, why not just tell the police? Why not get a restraining order? And believe me, I've explored those avenues. The legal system, especially when it comes to family, is a labyrinth designed for people who have the money, the patience, and the emotional bandwidth to navigate it. I've been in and out of courts for years regarding the custody of my kid, the divorce, and the sheer chaos they've caused. My energy is spent. My resources are drained. Sometimes, the most radical act of rebellion is simply to live a happy, successful, quiet life in spite of them. They want a reaction. They want a battle. They want me to be as miserable and chaotic as they are. Giving them nothing, no anger, no tears, no acknowledgement, is the only way to win. I'm thinking about all of you who commented on my last post, sharing your own stories of going no contact. Some of you talked about the guilt, the crushing, society-mandated guilt of turning your back on your blood. I hear you. I see you. And I want to tell you something I'm telling myself. You aren't the one who broke the relationship. They broke it the moment they decided that their desire to control you was more important than your right to be a healthy, happy, autonomous human being. You didn't live. You escaped. As I prepare for this funeral, I'm trying to reframe the narrative in my own head. Instead of it being a place where I might be ambushed, I'm choosing to see it as a place of sanctuary. It's a place where I am surrounded by people who have watched me grow, people who know the real me, not the version my parents tried to invent. They are my witnesses. They are the proof that I am loved, and they are the proof that I survived. I am going to walk into that church with my head held high. I am going to sit in that pew and I am going to listen to the eulogy and I am going to celebrate a life that mattered. And if I catch myself scanning the back of the room, I'm going to take a breath, look at my friend sitting next to me and remind myself, I am safe. I am protected. And I am finally free. I'm so grateful to have this space to talk to you. You've become an unexpected part of my support system. Your words, your encouragement, and even your own stories of struggle have been a light in this incredibly dark week. I'm going to carry that support with me, like a shield, when I walk into that funeral. If you've ever had to protect your peace from people who claimed to love you, but only knew how to own you, tell me your story in the comments. How did you learn to stop looking over your shoulder? How do you keep the fear from making decisions for you? Let's help each other stay strong. We are building a family of choice right here. And I don't know about you, but that's the only family I want to belong to. And don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to be sharing more about my journey, the ups, the downs, and the hard-won victories. Because I think we all need to be reminded that even when the ghosts of our past try to haunt us, we have the power to close the door. I'm ready. I'm nervous, I'm scared, and I'm shaking, but I'm ready. I'm going to honor my friend. I'm going to honor his sister, and I'm going to honor myself. I'll keep you all updated on how it goes. Thank you for listening, for believing me, and for standing with me. It means more than I can ever say. The days since I shared my story have been overwhelming, to say the least. The sheer volume of comments, messages, and shared experiences from people who have been exactly where I am, trapped in the web of a toxic family while trying to keep their own heads above water, has been a revelation. For so long, I felt like a lone soldier, fighting a secret war in the quiet corners of my own life. Reading your stories, hearing your struggles with no contact, and seeing how many of you have reclaimed your peace from the people who were supposed to protect you has changed the way I feel about this coming week. I'm still shaking when I think about the funeral. I'd be lying if I said the panic had completely vanished. It hasn't. My nervous system is still on high alert, still scanning the horizon for a danger that I pray will not arrive. But there is a difference now. I'm not just feeling the fear, I'm starting to observe it. I'm starting to see it as a relic of a past that doesn't have to dictate my future. My therapist helped me reframe something yesterday that I think many of you need to hear. The trauma didn't make you weak. The fact that you are still here, still fighting, still trying to build a life that feels like yours, is the ultimate sign of resilience. You weren't born into a situation where you could learn how to be strong in the conventional sense. You had to learn how to survive. You had to learn how to hide, how to deflect, how to be invisible when necessary. And now you're learning how to be seen. That is a gargantuan task. I've been thinking a lot about the why. Why do they keep doing it? Why do they keep trying to break down the walls I've spent years building? I've realized that for people like my parents, my existence without their input is a threat to their entire worldview. If I can be happy, if I can be whole, if I can be a good mother without them, then their narrative that I am damaged and incapable without their guidance is proven false. My independence is a mirror that they absolutely refuse to look into. When I walk into that chapel next week, I'm not going to be looking for them because I'm afraid. I'm going to be looking for my community. I'm going to be looking for the people who helped me when I couldn't help myself. I'm going to be looking for the people who sat in that kitchen with me every morning, drinking coffee and offering me the emotional shelter I so desperately needed. Those are the people who deserve my energy. Those are the people who deserve my focus. And if, God forbid, my parents do try to crash the service, I have finally decided on my response. It's not going to be a scene. It's not going to be a confrontation. It is going to be the most powerful, disorienting thing I can offer. They will become invisible to me. I will look right through them as if they are ghosts, because in my life, that's exactly what they are. They are ghosts of a life I've already left behind. They have no place in the present. They have no place in my child's future, and they certainly have no place in the way I grieve the people I love. I've also been thinking about the 2 hours of my time that my mother demanded. I realize now that even that, in its own sick way, was a bargain. She wanted me to give her 2 hours of my life to fix what she thought was broken, never realizing that the only thing broken was her perception of who I am. I'm never giving them another minute. Not 2 hours, not 2 seconds. My time is precious. My time is for my kid, for my friends, for my healing, and for the work I still have to do to become the person I want to be. I want to thank you all again for the support. Honestly, just typing this out, sharing these fears, and knowing that there is a community of thousands of you who get it, it's like the weight on my chest is a little lighter today. For the first time, I'm not just going to this funeral to survive it. I'm going to it to live it. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be there for my friend. I'm going to be the version of myself that he knows and loves. If you are currently in the middle of a struggle with your own family, please take a breath. Remind yourself that you don't have to solve everything today. You don't have to be healed by next week. You just have to show up for yourself. You just have to keep moving forward. I'll keep you all posted on how everything goes. And please, keep sharing your stories in the comments. Your bravery is helping me find mine. This isn't the end of my story, and it certainly isn't the end of yours. We're just getting started. The day of the funeral finally arrived. I remember waking up at 4:30 a.m., my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped animal desperate to escape. The air in my bedroom felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere knew what was at stake. I stared at the ceiling for hours, tracing the patterns in the plaster, trying to perform every grounding exercise I had learned over the last 7 years. I am safe. I am in my own home. My child is asleep in the next room, safe and sound. The door is locked. I am the one in control here. I had spent a week preparing for this moment as if I were gearing up for a battlefield. My clothes were laid out. Something simple, something that made me feel grounded and invisible at the same time. I had a small bag packed with my survival kit, noise-cancelling headphones, a fidget toy to keep my nervous system from exploding if things got too loud, and a picture of my kid tucked into my pocket to remind me exactly who I was protecting. The drive to the church was the longest 60 minutes of my life. Every black sedan, every older model station wagon, every car with a license plate from my parents' region, they all set my heart into a chaotic, irregular rhythm. I found myself hyperventilating, then forcing myself to breathe deep, counting to 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale. When I finally pulled into the parking lot of the church, the reality hit me like a physical blow. There were so many cars, so many people. The sheer sensory input of a crowd, the murmurs, the rustling of coats, the forced polite smiles of people paying their respects was almost too much to handle. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes, staring at the steering wheel, my knuckles white from the grip. "You don't have to do this," a voice in my head whispered. "You could turn the car around right now, drive home, and hide." But then I saw my friend. He was standing by the entrance greeting guests, his face pale and etched with a grief so profound it made my own anxieties seem trivial. He looked up, scanned the parking lot, and caught my eye. He didn't wave, he just nodded, a small, weary but deeply appreciative gesture. That was all it took. That small human connection shattered the paralyzing grip of the fear. I realized then that my presence mattered more than my terror. I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp and smelled of rain, a scent that will forever be tied to this memory. I walked toward the entrance, my eyes automatically doing that thing they always do, scanning the crowd. I checked the perimeter. I looked at the parked cars. I watched the people streaming into the chapel. My brain was a search engine designed to find my parents, looking for their posture, their specific gait, the way they stood when they were planning a confrontation. And then I reached the door. My friend was right there. He stepped forward, bypassed the formal greeting, and just pulled me into a brief, tight hug. "I'm so glad you're here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here," I said, and for the first time that morning, the words felt like a truth, not a promise I was trying to keep. We walked into the sanctuary together. The organ music was low and somber, vibrating in the floorboards. I took my seat in the second row, right where he had saved a space for me. I kept my eyes focused forward on the floral arrangements, on the casket, on anything but the faces of the people filing in behind me. I had my anchor sitting right next to me, just as we had planned. I could feel the reassuring presence of his shoulder against mine. The service began, and I did something I hadn't expected to do. I let myself cry. I didn't cry because of my parents, or the fear, or the stalking. I cried for my friend's sister. I cried for the loss of a beautiful, kind person who had been a part of my life since I was a child. The grief was pure, clean, and honest. It felt like a release. For the first time in my adult life, I was experiencing an emotion that didn't have to be filtered through the lens of my parents' manipulation. Throughout the entire hour, I remained on high alert. But something had shifted. The phantom threat of my parents' arrival was still there, buzzing in the back of my brain. But it was being drowned out by the reality of the people who actually loved me. I looked around the room and saw teachers who had supported me, neighbors who had looked out for me, and friends who had held me together when I was falling apart. I realized that if my parents did show up, they would be intruders in a space of genuine, authentic love. They wouldn't be able to handle the atmosphere of this room. It was too real for them. When the service ended and we began to file out, I held my breath. I walked slowly, scanning the faces one last time. There were strangers, distant relatives, co-workers, and friends. But there were no silhouettes from my past. I walked out into the cool afternoon air, and I felt a sensation that I can only describe as a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had done it. I had showed up. I had stood my ground, and I had survived without needing to turn into a warrior. I had just been a human being. The drive home was quiet. The silence in my car wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind that usually follows a confrontation or a panic attack. It was a strange, hollow sort of peace. For the first time in years, the rear view mirror didn't look like a lens through which an enemy might appear. It just looked like a piece of glass. I pulled into my driveway, cued the engine, and just sat there. I didn't rush to get inside. I didn't immediately start checking my windows or scanning the perimeter of the house for signs of tampering. I just let the engine tick as it cooled, listening to the neighborhood sounds, the distant hum of a lawnmower, the barking of a dog, the wind in the trees. I had spent so much of my life in a state of high alert, convinced that if I let my guard down for even a second, the world would rush in and destroy me. But today, the world had stayed right where it was. I walked into my house and the space felt different. It was still the same living room, the same quiet corners, but the feeling had shifted. It was no longer a fortress under siege. It was just home. That evening, I did something I rarely do. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb. I didn't want to see if there were any missed calls or notifications. I didn't want the outside world, even the well-meaning parts of it, to dictate my emotional state. I made dinner for my kid. We talked about school, we laughed at the show, and for the first time in as long as I can remember, I wasn't listening for a car door to slam or a heavy footfall on the porch. I was simply present. The trauma didn't magically evaporate. I know that. I know that tomorrow or next week or in a month, I might wake up with that familiar cold knot of dread in my stomach. I know that I'm still going to have to work at my therapy, still going to have to navigate the complex, messy landscape of a brain that was rewired by fear. But I had crossed a threshold. I had proven to myself that I could walk into the fire, stand in the heat, and come out the other side without being burned. I think the biggest lesson I learned from this whole experience, the one I want to leave you with, is that we give our power away by trying to predict the future. We try to map out every possible scenario, every what if, every potential catastrophe, hoping that if we just imagine it hard enough, we can prevent it. But you can't live your life in a state of constant anticipatory grief. You can't protect your future by constantly reliving your past. My parents didn't show up. They didn't call. They didn't disrupt the service. They stayed exactly where they belong, in the past. And I am here. I am in the present. I've been thinking about you all, the ones who have been messaging me, the ones who are in the thick of the no-contact battle. If there's one thing I've learned, is that we are all, in our own ways, building our own houses. Some of us are building them out of bricks and mortar, trying to create physical safety. Some of us are building them out of therapy, boundaries, and chosen family. But we are all building. And every time we say no to a toxic demand, every time we refuse to engage in the game, every time we choose our own peace over their approval, we are making our houses a little stronger. Don't wait to be fixed before you start living your life. Don't wait until you're perfectly calm and completely unbothered before you go to the places that matter. Go anyway. Go while you're shaking. Go while you're scared. Go while you're still processing the trauma. Just go. Because the more you show up for yourself, the more you prove to yourself that you are the one in charge. The quieter those ghosts become. I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep being the mother my kid deserves and the person I'm learning to love. And if they ever do show up, if they ever do try to break through that door again, I know now that I won't just be standing there alone. I have my support. I have my boundaries. And I have my silence. And that, I've realized, is more than enough. To anyone who's struggling today, you are stronger than your trauma. You are more capable than the people who tried to convince you that you were nothing. And you are, without a shadow of a doubt, worthy of a life that belongs entirely to you. Thank you for walking this road with me. Your support has been the greatest gift I could have asked for. I'm looking forward to a life where I'm not just surviving. I'm looking forward to a life where I'm actually, truly living. This journey is far from over, but for today, the war is quiet. And that is a victory. If this story has touched you, or if you found a way to reclaim your own life from a toxic past, please share it. Let's keep this conversation going. We're building something here, a community where it's okay to be a mess, as long as we keep showing up. And if you're new here, subscribe. We're in this together. I'm finally exhaling. For the first time in years, I'm actually breathing, and it's